Good evening, everybody. My name is John Ryder, and I'm the director here at the Flag Art Foundation. I want to welcome you all to tonight's conversation between Kelly Akashi and writer, independent curator, and art advisor Franklin Melendez, presented on the occasion of Kelly's Spotlight presentation, which you are all welcome to see or have seen or can see after the talk right outside the doorway over here. Kelly's is Flag's 32nd Spotlight presentation since the program began 3 years ago. And I just want to say that I'm continually impressed and humbled by how every artist has approached this one work exhibition. I'm also similarly excited how the visual and written arts can overlap. And Franklin's text is a beautiful and really tender complement to Kelly's new sculpture outside. Logistically, tonight's conversation will be around 45 minutes long, followed by Q&A. Ours is meant to be a fairly associative conversation that I hope will touch on history, process, poetry, memorials, and Franklin will start us off by reading his essay written specifically for the presentation. Before I hand things off, though, I'm going to do some short bios as just a means of introduction for everyone. Kelly Akashi is an artist living and working in Los Angeles, California. She received a BFA from Otis College of Art and Design in 2006 and an MFA from the University of Southern California in 2014. She also studied at the Staatsschule in Frankfurt in 2010. Recent solo exhibitions include Heirloom at Lisson Gallery on 24th Street, which is currently on view through July 25th, 2026. Kelly Akashi Converging Figures at Fondazione per la Galleria dell'Arte Moderna in Milan in 2024. And Kelly Akashi Encounters at the Henry Art Gallery in Seattle in 2024 as well. And her 10-year survey formation, which began at the San Jose Museum of Art in 2022, traveled to the Frye Museum in Seattle, and then on to the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego in 2024. Her work can be found in permanent collections of the Brooklyn Museum, Hammer, LACMA, MoCA LA, MCA San Diego, the Walker Art Music Center, and X-Museum in Beijing. She is included in the current Whitney Biennial 2026, co-organized by Marcelo Guerrera and Drew Sawyer, which is just on view down the High Line and up through August 23rd, 2026. She has also been commissioned to create a new monumental sculpture for JFK International Airport's new Terminal 1, debuting later this year. Franklin Melendez is a writer, independent curator, and art advisor based between New York and California. Melendez has been a regular contributor to numerous publications, including Artforum, Frieze, Flash Art, and Kaleidoscope, where he serves as the arts editor. He has also contributed to artist monographs and institute publications, including the 2022 exhibition Heroic Bodies at Rudolf Tenger Museum in Denmark. In 2017, Melendez co-founded the New York-based art advisory and curatorial forum, DM Office, along with Romain Duriac. DM Office has organized exhibitions throughout the United States, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. Most recently, Hudlinson Jr. selected works 1978 through 2000 at 15 Orient and Tribeca, which was a really tremendous exhibition. Really love that show. And then forthcoming projects include exhibitions in Shanghai and Taipei. Thank you both for not only being here tonight, but for your time and effort in making the Spotlight presentation so memorable. And before I hand this off for the second time, just a few housekeeping notes. While Kelly's presentation is just beyond the doorway, you're currently sitting in a group exhibition titled When the Moon Comes Over the Mountain, which is a nod to Lawrence Weiner's 1994 text piece, which you can find in the corners and doorways of the gallery like little musical notes. And the show includes 20 artists who are each approaching landscape and physical earth in very different ways. This is on view through July 31, 2026. Someone's caught in the elevator. On Flag's 10th floor, we have up an exhibition, a solo show by Anushka Mirchandani titled Everyone You Love Lives Here, which is her first institutional solo presentation in New York. It features the artist's recent painting series in conversation with historic works by Louise Bourgeois, Cindy Sherman, and Licia Scavage, also on view through July 31st. And now I will officially hand this off to Franklin, who will read his essay on Kelly's artwork, Heirloom, Sundial, 2025-2026.
Thank you. Thank you for that generous introduction. And I also like to thank Kelly for the invitation. This is a distinct pleasure for me. Kelly, I would say, is the person with whom I communicate the most extensively and endlessly about art. I would say almost on a daily basis, especially if we count memes. So this is a lovely extension of that. With that said, this is for Heirloom Sundial 2025-2026. Loss, impermanence, transformation. These are the modalities of Kelly Akashi's sculptural lyricism. Her choice materials articulate these drives through their inherent elemental properties: glass, bronze, photography, Each achieves form through a process of chemical conversion that hinges on giving up a previous iteration for a new incarnation. Yet traces of the exchange remain persistent as visible components: erosion, oxidation, fissures, all markers of time, of swapping a what was for a what has not yet been. This is perhaps just a roundabout way of saying things change. Better yet, a concrete example, the sculpture before you, or outside. An etched glass plate perched atop a wooden display structure whose legs taper elegantly, creating a type of upward exertion almost as if reaching on tippy toes. This is how the artist affectionately describes it. The plate itself is a functional object, part of a printmaking process called vitriography, whereby an image, or matrix, is etched directly onto a glass surface and then run through a press to yield vibrant and highly textured prints. These are called vitriographs. As with all of Kelly's explorations, the technique is inextricable from its conceptual undergirding. In fact, they are one and the same. And what initially drew Akashi to this somewhat idiosyncratic method was its ability to register loss as material absence, as sandblasting bores onto the face to create an impression, essentially a carving out. Something of this harkened back to a project from 2019 where she recreated the interior of fossilized shells by casting a block of crystal around the void. The resulting form is less a discrete object than a negative of the loss of that original material, a hollow core cast. If so inclined, one could almost identify a mathematical logic at play. A negative times a negative yields a positive, or at least a possibility of one. All forms of making carry knowledge in them, and precisely because of this, all forms of making are in themselves forms of care. The level of care is amply evident here in the almost fastidious attention to specificity in the search for an appropriate vehicle for the matrix in question. A lattice starburst that adorns the center of the plate. The image is drawn from the artist's personal archive, a set of vintage doilies that once belonged to her grandmother that she fortuitously rescued from a family garage sale around Thanksgiving 2024. She stored these precious memory wares in her home studio in Altadena, carefully scanning each of them and experimenting with their placement in new sculptures until they burned, along with all attendant structures around them in the Eaton fire of 2025. The images that now remain are composites of those pre-fire scans and scans of remnants found in the aftermath, charred fossils tentatively clinging to form. Ultimately, Akashi's formal explorations led her to pursue an alternate solution to vitriography. The end result is Imprints 2026, a series of embossed prints of the enlarged doilies flocked with book ash, also rescued from the site. These are currently on view in the Whitney Biennial 2026 at the Whitney Museum of Art, and in her companion solo exhibition, Heirlooms, at Listen Gallery. What we have before us then is one possibility arrested or stalled in a state of latency. And our experience is made all the more poignant for it, as it allows a glimpse into an open-endedness that is always at play in Akashi's work, but perhaps not as readily apprehended. At certain times of the day, the afternoon sun will flood into the galleries, shining through the plate to create a projection. The negative becomes a lens. Akashi has pondered if perhaps this ephemeral optical event is the actual artwork. After all, phantasmagoria has been tethered to photography since its inception. Alternately, we can think of this display as a figure, in the sense of a non-textual illustration of an idea. Think figure 1, figure 2 in medical textbooks. However, as the term implies, there is an inherent allusion to the body. Here we're back to tippy toes. But this is not a representation of it. It is present only as abstraction, like Akashi's own body in her casts, or arguably her entire output. This distinction is key because in its abstraction, we're able to commune with the more immaterial qualities of the body, those emotive possibilities that exceed far beyond its fleshy contours. A body that grieves, a body that yearns, a body that harbors knowledge it does not fully apprehend. A body unmoored presents a side of radical possibility precisely because it is not fixed to a single position, and thus presents itself to be infinitely reimagined. This approach is an almost ontological stance for the practice. Mulling on an upcoming public project, Akashi ruminates on some of these implications. Quote, "It's exciting to think that," this is very strange to pantomime your quote in front of you. Quote, "It's exciting to think that sculpture can send a message to coming generations. I've been approaching public sculpture in that way, and how its forms have been produced and presented to us by past generations. And now, looking ahead, I think about it as a vehicle to relate to unknown futures and unknown bodies, how we can come to meet them even when we no longer inhabit our own bodies." End quote. Sculpture as astral projection, who could say with any certainty, but what a thrill to imagine.
Thank you very much. I think it'd be helpful to begin tonight's conversation by asking Kelly where heirloom sundial fits into the overall practice and in conversation with the work you've been making over the past couple of years. Clearly, with the Whitney Biennial and the current Listen Show and Flag Spotlights, there's many biographical through threads and linkages, but it would be best to hear what those linkages and through threads are for you, from you.
I knew this was the first question. It's like everything in one question all at once. It's like not only everything, but like every show that's open right now. It's like such a big... So I wanted to use it to talk about maybe, because it's hard to talk about this specific moment, maybe I'll talk about some of the other projects in relationship to it right now, and what's been so exciting about doing this project here and working with this specific, like very specific location, this wall by this window. I think increasingly more and more I've been thinking about, I mean, in the past and for many years, I've been very interested in a lot of craft traditions, a lot of objects that carry knowledge in different ways. And I really loved studying them and thinking about them as a way to not only speak to past generations, but also put that knowledge in the objects I make and then transmit them into the future, which you touched on in your essay. As I start to make more outdoor sculpture, more public sculpture, I'm really thinking about not only what you said, that they can also transmit information to future generations, but I'm thinking about them in relationship to the sites they're in a variety of ways. You know, one of those experiences, quite bluntly, you brought it up, was, you know, going through this fire. We were talking about what work outdoors means before this talk, and I was saying, well, this work is such a great opportunity to engage the sunlight, you know, the outdoors without presenting a work that's vulnerable to the elements. But there's lots of different kinds of outdoors I feel like I'm exploring, or outdoor environments I'm exploring in the work right now. The Whitney's another great example of that. Of course, it's on the terrace. Bizarrely enough, even though I titled this now Sundial, we've been talking about how it's its own sundial, which I'm going to be thinking about after this talk. But separately, like the site in Altadena, where I just hosted a 2-day event last weekend, you know, it has a very different sense of being outdoors. It's very vulnerable. And I've often talked about that on the terrace, that I'm so happy that work could be shown outdoors for its first time, because when you experience it, you're as exposed as that chimney is, and that's been very important to me. And I guess looping back around to this work, I'll just say it was a very comfortable way to show something very fragile and sensitive, but also give it a relationship to the sun and these like environmental conditions.
Gotcha. I think that kind of answers the second question, but Franklin, I think this is important. In larger presentations with more artworks, an artist can tell a different kind of story and thread together a different kind of narrative, where other works act as support structures. For a one-work exhibition where something is standalone, I'm interested in both how artists and writers kind of approach a more focused presentation in a way, but maybe not. So I think if you're thinking about sundials and the extension of how things can be both affected by the elements but not necessarily exposed by the elements, I think it would be interested to know, between your relationship with Kelly and the invitation, how you approached the essay component.
That's a great question, especially because for this occasion it's particularly hard, because usually you have a little bit of distance, I think, from the subject, so you want to be almost you were able to look at things not objectively, but at least from a particular perspective. With Kelly, that's particularly difficult for the reasons we've mentioned before, but it also provided a great opportunity, because I think why I found this particular piece so moving is that it's so generative, and in fact, it's so intimate, it's provisional, it almost feels like a test or a material study. But then, for me at least, and this is something that has always moved me about Kelly's work from the first time we had a studio visit, that in itself is the core. There's this material process curiosity that animates the entire endeavor, and actually, it works very much like a type of refraction, and that for me is what struck me the most in the process of writing an essay, that actually this was an original test that then, it generated a series of other works, but this remained as a latent test that it itself became a piece. Okay. And it became a testament of both the process, but of Kelly's intellectual curiosity that is always couched in very specific material kind of vessel.
I think, just deviating for a second, I think one of the things that keeps coming up is the idea of like perspective and distance. What was the first piece you made with residue of the fire after the fire?
I mean, you'd have to define piece or art at that point. Okay. I don't know. I guess it was probably a piece I reclaimed.
Okay.
That I had to refinish, or it was the piece that was halfway done and survived in the kiln, and then I kept working on it afterwards. But they were both in the show at Listen, Los Angeles. This is the first work you could say I made, I guess, thinking about the materials that were no longer with me. And I was very excited about it because, of course, I'm very fascinated with how to materialize immaterial concepts or immaterial objects. I can talk about that more or less at different points. But for me, this plate, just to get into like what you're looking at for a minute, it's a piece of float glass that I created a mask on using the scans that I still had on my computer that I thankfully took with me. And then I adhered the mask, and then I actually just hand sandblasted the doily into it, so it, I was able to control it, for better or worse. I was able to control it, and then determine how deep I wanted to engrave it. So it's been, the image you're seeing has been carved out, and I was quite into that idea that you feel like you're seeing an object, but it's actually a removal, similar to the hollow core cast you mentioned before.
And for that process, does it physically go into a spray booth, and it's like a hand etching, or? Yeah,
I'm like this.
Okay.
Like I'm like that, very even at a good distance, 30 PSI.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think also the interesting thing is with these kind of 3 exhibitions concurrently happening in New York, there's a ton of material exploration. So whether it's kind of the idea of glass or bronze casting or Core 10 steel pedestals, or a gigantic chunk of labradorite, and then also the printmaking. Part of me is interested in just also what the process is like in terms of an idea and then a more material exploration. And are there ideas which then ask for certain materials, and then are there materials you work with which then beget certain pieces afterwards?
Oh man, it's all at the same time.
Okay.
It's all just like, it's a little messy at first, because I like to have fun. I'm an artist that likes to have fun. I don't like to be bored, I don't know if you can tell. But yeah, I'm kind of sometimes just making things, not really thinking about what they mean, but I'm trying to understand a process, trying to learn something. I mean, not only from the material, but also the techniques that have been passed down to me over time through those processes. And sometimes it's very free, but I do like when I don't have deadlines so that I can explore that moment. But as a deadline starts to loom, I really like to use language to start to focus my attention because I really care about communicating to people. I'm not trying to make things in my studio that nobody will ever understand. I don't know, I'm not trying to be too obscure. I am thinking about what it's saying, and I really care about understanding what I'm trying to say through the work I make. So, yeah, I often use language to start dictating that and controlling that and focusing what I want to share and how it's being put together. But there's like, I'm making it sound very like easy or simple or planned. There's a lot of
Trial and error.
there's a lot of chaos.
Well, Franklin, I think you start out your essay by talking about loss, impermanence, and transformation are conceptually and physically baked into the practice, and how specific material decisions, whether it's glass, bronze, or photography, are also about alchemical change. So if you just want to talk about your perspective on those materials, I think it'd be fascinating to know.
Can you explain that a little more?
Those materials in relation to how Kelly's using them in the work that she's making.
Yeah, you know, I am personally, I work in the arts, but I'm personally a lover of photography. Historically, you know, personally, I'm just drawn to the process, but I do think that the advent of photography fundamentally changed kind of the way that we visualize the world, but also ourselves. You know, there's much better and smarter people have elucidated this. You know, Bazan, Kaja Silverman, you know, The Miracle of Analogy is a kind of a great elucidation of that. And what I find most moving about it is that it has such a direct relationship to the world, but it's still kind of separated from it. And the way that it comes into being is through this very simple chemical process where you kind of expose paper that has a silver emulsion, or at least you used to pre-digital. You know, you expose it, there's an element of chance, and then you bring it in, you develop it, and then you expose paper again, and something about that will work. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever spent time in a dark room, but there's something really thrilling about being in the dark and having this sort of image come into being before you. There's something extremely poetic about it, where that it doesn't matter the aesthetic quality of the image or what it captures, is really just about the fact that this sort of aesthetic phenomenon is being kind of conjured before you by, you know, a water bath and some vinegar. Fundamentally, for me, I don't think Kelly's work is about photography, but there's a photographic thinking to it, because so much of it is precisely about that, this kind of conjuring matter out of other matter. It's not necessarily, it's not definitively about transfiguration, so we're not spinning straw into gold, but I've always loved the poetics of, you know, taking a solid and making it liquid, or like a solid becoming, you know, a semi-solid and then a gas, as with the candles, you know, or the process of making bronze where you make a wax cast and then that gets lost in the process of making something that's solid and seemingly permanent. You know, for me, at the core, I always situate the practice precisely at that moment where you have this change from one state of matter to another state of matter. And really, the beauty of it is precisely that, very similar to that conjuring of an image in a darkroom. The fact that you're even able to do that, to me, is quite moving.
Yeah.
Oh no, I love that you brought that up though, because it made me think about this work. I didn't get to bring it up earlier when I was talking about the process, but it is a latent image that I created, because a big part of this is I really love the idea that sometimes the sun will pass in front of it, and then you're seeing the real work. You're seeing the projection from the sun through the plate onto the wall. And we put a light there so that you're not left, you know, unfulfilled in the meantime. But, you know, sometimes if you're so lucky, you might get to see the sun create the real artwork.
But did I read somewhere that you started off through analog photography?
Yeah, I unfortunately did.
Okay.
In the early 2000s, it was like, I graduated in 2006, and it was like, why did you get that degree? It's worth nothing now.
What type of images were you
But look, I
interested
was
in?
able to get into sculpture. What kind of images? I was really into documentary photography. But yeah, we don't have to talk about that too much right now.
Okay.
I made weird, I'd like kind of stage these events or create these experiences. I guess I did that last weekend, actually.
Yeah, it's not so far
Oh my
from
God, I'm
Full
doing the
circle.
same thing. Okay, I'm gonna have like an existential crisis in front of you. Okay.
But then what was the shift from that to sculpture?
I mean, part of it was out of necessity. The world, again, I want to talk to the world. I don't want to be isolated from it. And I understood people thought about photography different than me. People thought about analog photography differently than me. I really loved, experimental processes in the darkroom, but in 2006, people hated that. They were like, that is so stupid. Why would you do that? We don't want to see sprockets anymore, Now, like 20 years later, I think there's this whole new way of looking at very handmade, dust on prints. You have
Yeah.
a dust on a print in here.
Absolutely.
People see it very differently now, but in 2006, out of necessity, I had to really understand what it was about those materials, those techniques that I loved, and take it to a medium that I could, share with people and that they could, understand, and we could be on the same field, basically.
When was the first time you cast your hands?
It was 2015.
Okay, so that's 3 years into that.
3 years
Wait,
into that. No,
wait.
that was 2006 to 2015.
Okay,
So,
got it,
yeah.
okay.
I wish it was only 3 years. Yeah.
Okay, well so the unique hand casts have been something that you've been making for years, which can also be seen in the current listen show throughout the galleries. They pepper the walls and hold roses and irises from the garden. The casts are uncanny because they're life-size, lifelike, and when read with previous body casts, they form a timeline where you can see fingernails growing or the lifelines kind of deepen over time. Well, Flag's piece is titled Sundials, which, again, when the weather hits it specifically, kind of does that function. It clearly talks about time and its effects, as do the hands in a certain way as well. Would you talk about when you started casting those parts of the body, the interest in continuing to do so, what it means to be confronted by the effects of time, and how you think about personal and geological time in relationship to the practice? And I know there's 4 gigantic questions in there.
Yeah, I mean, everyone here probably understands what it feels like to feel the time on their body. For me, thinking about that as a quality of the practice, or thinking about my own mortality as a kind of bigger project within the practice, it's very real. I know, not to say anything in art isn't real, but it's a very real thing that we all have to grapple with in our lives. And I often find that art, it's such a special space to be, protected, because we just don't have a lot of space to talk about these things in everyday life. So often mortality, thinking about inheritance, things like that. I'm really finding ways to open up that space within my practice, so that it's not really about just how I feel, but about talking about it more broadly with people.
Sure.
How they manage that, how they handle it, what their relationship is, yeah.
But then over this time also, clearly it's a universal, my parents in the process of selling their home, and I'm thinking about childhood memories going away.
Yeah.
I think whether it's
Yeah.
lost that's either controlled or not controlled, it's still a loss.
Yeah.
And I think it's also with that happening, you realize, oh, you're no longer a child, or that they will die, or that these things will kind of happen. But to physically have it in family photos become something to flip through an album, to physically have the cast of a hand. What also have you learned about yourself and your body through having these physical remnants of yourself out in the world?
What have I learned? I'm still learning, so it's such a hard thing to wrap up. I guess I would say, I use them for a lot of different things. So, sometimes they're about, I use them in so many different ways. Conjuring was such a great word to bring up, because in the show at Listen, for example, I was really interested in the plants not just having any relationship to the body, but really feeling like I was conjuring them. That was very important to me. I don't want to unpack that any further. I'm just going to leave it there. But that was the vibe, I think, undeniably. And aside from that, I don't know. It's hard to say that. I feel like I won't know for a very long time. Sure. I've been, like we said, it's been 11 years. It hasn't been that long still. But I'm still kind of exploring all these different avenues.
Okay. And I think this is a larger, more just philosophical question that I'd be interested in just both of the thoughts on. But a fellow curator and friend of mine a long time ago wanted to organize an exhibition looking at monuments and memorials, but through the lens that erecting a memorial, often in plain sight, is also a means of like moving on and moving past something. When something gravitational happens, we build something to contain our feelings, and it's important, but it also allows us to kind of locate it, and maybe also allows us to forget it. And I think that forgetting is a really interesting human defense mechanism. Like, I think to have an eidetic memory would just be just sheer hell. How do you think about works like Monument and Heirloom, both of which kind of have this kind of pall of history and carrying it forward? How do you think about those relationships to forgetting or choosing not to forget?
I mean, it's tough. Making a sculpture that I call a monument was really a proposition I was putting out, because I'm not the only one that work is speaking for. And again, I'm sorry to keep putting it on audience, but it's been really great to hear from everybody about how they've received it and responded and how they relate to it, regardless of the experiences they're bringing to the table. But it's hard for me. I know what you're saying about forgetting and remembering, but for me, it was. I just thought about it very differently, because my story, or the story that work specifically tethered to, is still happening. It's not over. And so much I think about my town and where the original chimney is being in this moment between death and life. And and I'm going to get kind of emotional talking about this, but what's so hard about it is you really want to have hope, but you have no idea what you're hoping for.
Sure.
And so there's something about that work that is trying to put out that, there's a way to hold on to what we've had, and also rebuild it in a new material, in a new way. But it'll still honor what we have, but we don't always know what that is, and it won't look the same. It's very painful, honestly, to talk about, but that's the best way I can explain it right now.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, let's change rows just a little bit, but again, I think like an interesting way. And I said this to you upstairs, and I'm framing it again like this down here. But I think this is a strange question, or perhaps a strange means of getting to a question. But just go with me. Be it either your family or your hands or your history, you are clearly in the work, both as a maker and often as the subject. Like, I think about the difference between autobiography and memoir, where in an autobiography, it demands facts as they happened, while a memoir allows for someone's history to unfold as they want to remember it or as they do remember it. As a maker and subject, is there a difference between Kelly Akashi, the artist behind the work, and Kelly Akashi, the subject of the work? And can we ever really know about like subjectivity and objectivity as maker and subject?
It's something I'm trying to sort out. I feel like all my answers are, I'm trying to figure this out. So, but I'm just being honest. I've only been making sculpture for what have we determined now? Like 10 years or 11 years or something. I wasn't trained in sculpture. I kind of come at it from this roundabout way. And, I have a lot of issues with sculpture too. And so sometimes you see that play out in the work. But yeah, I think what you're talking about, I just didn't have a choice. I feel like in terms of where the work's gone now, some of my story was just out there, and it was very exposing in some ways. It's not fun for everyone to know about these things that you're going through, but I just really believe in that artists can make something out of anything, and I really believe in the power of making meaning, especially out of things that can feel very not specific to you and meaningless. And yeah, I just think a lot about that. So I don't know what that line is, but I'm definitely here. Like I'm I'm me. You can talk to me afterwards.
Because I think that was a conversation that we were both having upstairs in terms of.
No, I'm very interested. I look at Alina Sapoznikov's work a lot. I think about the same questions. We talked about Andy Warhol actually in relationship to
For me,
this
the division, not to speak for you, but and this coming from our conversation, there, the subject object, but it's also the practice, as you refer to it. And, in our conversation, Kelly's always like, it's Kelly's needs, but then there's like a whole other conversation about the practice as an entity in itself that has its own needs. And you, in many ways, frame yourself as operating in service of the practice. I've always been really impressed by that.
The things I make in my story are only as useful to me as I'm able to use them to connect to other people. I've talked a lot about the chimney. Even this work, thinking about the loss of items we've inherited. They're tools. They're tools to take us to parts of ourselves people remember, better understandings of ourselves, good memories. And when we lose those tools, it's really hard. But that doesn't mean we lost what they connect us to.
Sure.
And so often I've talked about that with people, their own relationships, their own histories, family history stories that they don't even know and they want to understand. How do you understand those? And also notions of home.
Well, also, I think what we'd be interested to talk to as well, it's like, I'd be interested to know your relationship to also scale. Because it's like, in the show on 24th Street, there's a ring that's about the size of a small child, with a small boulder of labradorite in there. At the Whitney, it's a scale replica. Scale?
This is like a one-to-one scale.
Okay, one-to-one.
Yeah.
And then also at Listen, there's some fragments of the lace hanging from the ceiling in cut steel. I think this is a two-parter. So for these kind of independent objects that are part of exhibitions, what is your approach to scale when it is a one-to-one with life or when it becomes larger than that? But then also, the second part of that is with the JFK commission around the corner, like how are you thinking about scale in one of the nation's largest airports?
Okay, now you're making me nervous.
Oh, sorry, my God. I made you cry, I made you nervous, I failed.
This is like a roller coaster of emotions, you guys, between the two of you. Okay. Scale, yes, I can talk about scale as a professional sculptor. I've been having a lot of fun with scale because for so often I thought about everything as being on a one-to-one relationship with the human body, and the hands were a great signal of that.
And are the hands, you're casting the hands yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But recently, thinking about different scales, I'm thinking about monumentality sometimes. I'm thinking about what's the right way to put this? I'm working on a public project where I'm taking something very small and making it so big that it's about the wonder of the natural engineering of those objects. With the ring, for example, I got very excited to think about mass not only being about physical sculptural mass, but also psychological mass and weight. That enlargement being a way to think through the kind of psychological weight of grief and loss. JFK, different conversation.
Can you describe the project, or is it under wraps?
I don't like describing it till it's done, but it is a kind of cultivator work. So it's a cast of my hand paired with flowers from the general region here, the state of New York. And they're flowers that have migrated all over the world. So it's speaking to migration, kind of through the use of these flowers, incorporating them with the human body.
Nice.
Do you mind? Yeah, I just wanted to actually relate it to that because I think when we were discussing earlier, we were kind of on the same thread. But I am really curious, because your practice has been defined by this relationship to the body. I was reading earlier and remembering those early candles that you would then drape over your arm or around, so they would become imprints of your body. So it was, that very literal kind of relationship, like having touched your body. I was curious about, and because of that, they have this kind of great intimacy. Once again, the sundial work is great because I feel like it invites viewers to approach it as a body. There's a relationship to it that's very direct and very intimate. I was wondering, as you're in this kind of juncture in your career in scaling up, how that has kind of changed your relationship to this idea of intimacy that's always inherent in your sculpture.
Scaling up. Yeah, because you're talking about engineering needs.
Yeah, exactly. Like things that are not reliant on your body.
Yeah, I can't be casual.
Basically, you need a team.
Can't be spontaneous.
Become architectural almost.
You want to be safe, safety first, like for real, yeah. But yeah, I think making the chimney. There's a beautiful recreation of a weed in the show at Listen. I've been really excited to. There's things that I just can't make, and I'm not interested in anybody feeling limited by their bodies. So, making those two works in particular and thinking about ways I might expand the practice, I've been very excited to work directly with people trained in very specific disciplines, because I'm thinking about their engagement as a way that they're carrying generations of knowledge through my practice and through these artworks that I can't embody, and I didn't start doing masonry at the age of 7, so I can't do that now. But that's no reason to not make it. It's been very exciting to engage somebody that can embody and transmit that knowledge into the work. So that's one way I'm thinking about it. And I am, even with these kinds of projects, I'm working with companies. I'm working with UAP on that. I'm working with Christian Inga Mason, but I am. Really meddling with how it's getting made still. Like really getting in there and being like, it has to be made this way, while you're seeing, what looks like a very straightforward recreation of a chimney and glass bricks. It did not start out that way. Yeah. So that's the best way I can put it. Yeah.
That's great.
And then I have one last question before I think we open this up, but I think for the Spotlight presentations where there's a relationship between the artist and the author, I kind of always like to ask this question. It's a little schmaltzy, but just go with me. I think it'd be nice to hear how you both met and what it is about each other that you both kind of admire and respect.
We met, actually, this was around 2015. There's this artist that is maybe one of the most unsung artists who are working today, and actually so intellectually rigorous, he kind of thought himself out of making objects. He largely started working in chemical formulas. His name is Sean Raspit. Someone that I ran into this other artist at a party a couple weeks ago, and we were going on and on about what a amazing contributor he is. So he's someone that I deeply respected, and he was at grad school at UCLA. And I just wrote him out of the blue, and I was like, who's good in LA? Because I was heading there to do some studio visits. And topmost on his list was Kelly, actually, and he connected me to you when you were still at USC. And I feel like after that it's sort of fuzzy, but somehow we're still here.
You came to the show that me and Sean did, which was the craziest show. I won't even, it was so
actually, can you talk a little bit about
fire,
that?
And there were like gases in walls, like weird heavy gases in walls that were not flammable.
It's a little,
I made a doorknob for the gallery, and he had a scent machine filling the space, and there was nothing else in the space but the scent machine. It was cool. It was good.
The show itself was almost like capturing gases and scents in a very poetic way, and you provided a bunch of these sort of like candle chandeliers that sort of dripped and melted, and they just left an imprint of themselves on pillows.
Yeah, I made pillows for it. Yeah, I still have the pillows somewhere, I think. But yeah, and then so that's the story of how we met. I mean, Franklin, it's everything. It's not just one thing. I feel very funny, like just talking about
No, that's lovely.
here, but yeah.
I would say, really the connection is that we had a studio visit. Actually, it was my first full studio visit with Kelly. The first thing I noticed was her fingernail. And then she grows them, and she's like, I like to grow them out because they're markers of time. And then she was telling me about the candles and then about the bronze. And eventually I was like, everything, this is all about photography, but there's no photography in it. Everything is everything's an index, an imprint. Everything's about marking durations of time. Everything was an exposure, but not within the classic language of photography. And she was like, I love that you noticed that. And she ran to a corner of the studio and unboxed something. And then she came back with a photograph. And she's like, oh, I've never shown anyone these. I made them in school. And it was kind of like an immediate connection, I think, over this sort of shared love of photography.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you both for participating tonight. Thank you. Q&A, and then we'll clap. Okay. All right. Any questions in the audience?
guys are good students. Maybe we can talk casually after.
Sure, absolutely. Oh, Venetia.
I have a question.
Okay.
I just wanted to say an experience, responding to Kelly's work at the chimney. Somehow, from the talk, I realized that, your work in the process really has all this vulnerability and your life, which I remember I texted you when you were having this disaster in Altadena. But I went to Whitney, during the opening with my 24-year-old daughter, and she didn't know how you work. And I said, you have to see this artist. I didn't know her anything, and we just saw it in front of her, and all of a sudden she started crying. And I said, Natalie, what do you do? She said, I think this artist has gone through a very, very, very long trauma. And she studied philosophy, that's her background. And I don't know where, we saw your work before, the corridor, the next. And then we just sat there. It was a beautiful day, very sunny. We just sat there, we said, talk now and work. And then I will never forget that experience that I had with her after I was telling her about your pieces that I've seen before, since the residency that you had in Athens, that how I can follow your work, and I never met you. And then she said, well, she's coming open now, Mama. She's just really this drama is coming open. She's in public places, so she's really coming to talk to the world in open. And so kind of like connect what she said and what you described for us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been very interesting to hear from so many different people. I've had people react similarly. I've also heard there were people making out behind the chimney. So I guess we've got a real range of responses from it.
If there's nothing else, I just want to say thank you both again for being
Thank
here tonight.
you.
This is such a special experience. And thanks everyone for joining us.